What's going on, YouTube? It's Ashcon, aka Dropped Out Beats here, back again with another Addiction Neuroscientist Reacts video. For those just tuning into the channel, I'm a trained addiction neuroscientist and hip-hop producer, and this is a series where I react to a variety of musicians from all genres talking about their drug experience, whether it be firsthand or secondhand from friends and family. And so I'm not even going to waste y'all's time. Today we're going to be looking at Jelly Roll testifying in Congress recently over a fentanyl bill that declares fentanyl a national emergency. Unless you've been sleeping under a rock, I'm sure you've heard of fentanyl and the powerful opioid that it is, causing overdose widespread across the country. They brought in Jelly Roll to testify, and today we're going to see if I agree with what Jelly Roll has to say. With that being said, let's take my big head off the screen and put Jelly Roll's big ugly head on the screen and listen to what he has to say. Powerful testimony here from Jelly Roll. I'm going to tell you, you don't want to miss this, so stick to the end. Let's see what he has to say.
Used to having a rock and roll band behind me when I have a microphone in front of me.
Clever start.
During the time that I've been given to share my testimony here, I think it's important to note before I start that in these 5 minutes I'll be speaking that somebody in the United States will die of a drug overdose, and it is almost a 72% chance that during those 5 minutes it will be fentanyl related. Having started that way, Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Scott, and esteemed committee members, thank you for having me. I know this is a bit of a curveball, but I like a little baseball myself. My name is Jason D4, but to most I am known as Jelly Roll. It is important to establish earlier that I am a musician and that I have no political alliance. I am neither Democrat nor Republican. In fact, because of my past, my right to vote has been restricted. Thus far, I have never paid attention to a political race in my life.
I'm going to pause right there because I think that's just a powerful, statement about doing crime in America and the fact that this man's right to vote has been taken away from him because he was caught for selling illegal drugs and now he's a felon. Drop in the comments below if you think that's right. I don't think that's right. I mean, I don't understand why you'd be restricted to vote unless you are doing felony crimes in politics, right? Like, unless you are trying to get yourself elected, reelected, doing, devious political activities. I don't understand why we restrict all felons' rights to vote, but drop in the comments below if you have other ideas of stuff I haven't thought about. Let's get back to what Jelly Roll has to say.
Ironically, I think that makes me the perfect person to speak about this because fentanyl transcends partisanship and ideology, gentlemen and women. This is a totally different problem.
Strong start.
And I was speaking outside to the media, and I gave them a statistic that said 190 people a day overdose and die every single day in the United States of America. That is about a 737 plane. That's what about a 737 aircraft can carry. Could you imagine the national media attention it would get if they were reporting that a plane was crashing every single day and killing 190 people?
Yeah, so you already know we definitely are going to pause there because that is a super powerful statistic. Almost 200 people a day overdosing on opioids. And again, if this is the first video you're just tuning into, it's hard to say that people who have died from fentanyl consumption, it's hard to say if they have died from an overdose because someone that has died from an overdose would be someone who has died from a fentanyl overdose, that would be someone who's intentionally taking fentanyl. And you might say, who's intentionally taking fentanyl? There's plenty of people out there intentionally taking fentanyl now because it's widespread. You can buy a small amount of drug and get high on it. It's extremely potent, right? But that also makes it more dangerous and therefore easier to overdose on. So the problem with fentanyl in particular is that if you buy a drug that isn't fentanyl and there's fentanyl in that drug and you end up overdosing on fentanyl, that's not an overdose, that's a poisoning. Because a drug that you did not intend to take ended up in your body and killed you. That is not an overdose. If you If you bought cocaine and there's fentanyl in your cocaine and you overdose on fentanyl, that's a fentanyl poisoning. It's not an overdose, right? You had no intention of taking fentanyl. You had the intention of taking cocaine, but because we have an illegal drug supply that's tainted, now every drug is basically tainted with fentanyl, you can't trust that drug. So you have to get a fentanyl test kit if you're ever doing a substance like that. I do not condone drug use on this channel. We are just saying that if you want to be safe, use a fentanyl test kit. Now, back to this statistic of how many people die from fentanyl. That is an extremely powerful statistic, but I think we need to put this into perspective. Let's find out how many people die from alcohol a day. If you didn't know, I already looked it up when I started watching this. So according to the CDC, excessive alcohol use was responsible for about 488 deaths per day in the United States during 2020 to 2021, which is an estimated 178,000 people per year. This is a 29% increase from 2016 to 2017. So obviously the pandemic destroyed our nation in terms of drug use. Everyone was locked inside and they were taking drugs, whether it be opioids or alcohol. Alcohol is just another drug. The fact that it's legal doesn't make it any safer, or actually it does make it a lot safer. Excuse me. What I meant to say is it doesn't make it any less of a drug. The fact that alcohol is legal is actually why alcohol is safe, is because you know that every time you buy alcohol and you drink alcohol, you're buying and drinking the alcohol at the percentage that it says it is, and you know relatively how intoxicated it's going to make you. But so, again, back to this, 488 deaths per day. That's 2 to 3 times the amount of people that Jelly Roll is talking about die from fentanyl. Now, you may make the point, well, does that include car accidents? Does that include XYZ? And I'm not going to look into this statistic anymore because it doesn't matter to me. Because when I thought about what Jelly Roll was saying and I thought about this statistic, something clicked for me. You cannot parse apart the deaths from a drug that are related to something like car accidents from drunk driving and separate that from an overdose. And here's why. Every drug imparts different behavioral effects, right? Some drugs, like weed, for instance, right? We know that cannabis, for instance, is going to get you high. You maybe get stuck on the couch. You want to eat a bunch of food, the typical, I smoked weed story. If you've never been around people using opioids, it's not that different. They just don't want food. They just sit and start falling asleep. Then maybe they're not laughing as much, like people that are high or stone on weed instead of opioids are going to be like laughing. We're going to watch a funny movie, going to laugh, eat some chocolate chip cookies, whatever. But people on opioids, they're going to, fall asleep. They're going to start nodding off. They're going to start not being able to interact with the outside world, which, similar to weed, maybe that leads them to not driving a car, right? That leads them to less reckless behaviors. The reckless behavior was taking the drug, not driving a vehicle. So on alcohol, you become significantly more reckless. You start driving your vehicle, you start doing 100 miles an hour on your vehicle. We cannot say that alcohol or that death was not alcohol related, right? So possibly 2 to 3 times the amount of people dying from alcohol compared to fentanyl or opioids in this case. Something to think about. And alcohol is a legal drug.
But because it's 190 drug addicts, we don't feel that way. Because America has been known to bully and shame drug addicts instead of dealing and trying to understand what the actual root of the problem is with that.
I have a lot to say about that, but I don't even need to say anything because what he just said is super powerful. Drug addicts are not any less than human. They are human. They are your friends, family, colleagues, what have you. Let's let Jelly Roll keep going at it.
But the sad news is that narrative is changing too, because the statistics say that in all likelihood, almost every person in this room has lost a friend, family member, or colleague to the disease known as addiction.
Yeah, and so part of this channel is to help honor those that we may have lost to drug addiction, substance use disorder. Doesn't matter what we call it right now. If you have lost someone, please comment them down below. Rest in peace. I am sorry for your loss. I'm sorry for Jelly Roll's loss. We're here to honor those people and hope for a better, brighter future where we don't see 200 overdose deaths per day or 488 alcohol-related deaths per day, right? We want more responsible drug use.
I've attended more funerals than I care to share with y'all. This committee, I could sit here and cry for days about the caskets I've carried of people I loved dearly, deeply, in my soul, good people, not just drug addicts, uncles, friends, cousins, normal people. Some people that just got in a car wreck and started taking a pain pill to manage it. One thing led to the other. And how fast it spirals out of control, I don't think people truly understand. So many people. Equally, I think it's important for me to tell y'all that I'm not here to defend the use of illegal drugs. And I also understand the paradox of my history as a drug dealer standing in front of this committee. But equally, I think that's what makes me perfect to talk about this. I was a part of the problem. I am here now standing as a man that wants to be a part of the solution. I brought my community down. I hurt people. I was the uneducated man in the kitchen playing chemist with drugs I knew absolutely nothing about, just like these drug dealers are doing right now when they're mixing every drug on the market with fentanyl, and they're killing the people we love.
Double clap that.
I'll be honest with y'all, my desire is to only get older and only do better and be better.
Clap that.
I believed when I sold drugs genuinely that selling drugs was a victimless crime. I truly believe that, y'all. My father always told me what doesn't get you in the wash will get you in the rinse. Now I have a 15-year-old daughter whose mother is a drug addict. Every day I get to look in the eyes of a victim in my household of the effects of drugs. Every single day. And every single day I have to wonder, if me and my wife, if today will be the day that I have to tell my daughter that her mother became a part of the national statistics. History repeats itself, gentlemen. Even in the 1990s, crack cocaine had long made its way into my middle lower class neighborhood. And at that moment, even as a teenager, you could have never convinced me in that moment that there would be a far bigger problem on the horizon in the form of a pharmaceutical drug. And then I watched opioids and Oxycontin burst onto the scene.
Yeah, so let's pause right there for a second, because he first says that he doesn't think selling drugs is a victimless crime, but then he kind of implies that he does believe that selling drugs is a victimless crime. I kind of think it's a nonsense argument to determine whether or not drugs or selling drugs is a victimless crime. Nature creates drugs, and therefore nature is a drug dealer. Whether or not you think Mother Nature is a bad person and should be locked away in jail for selling and creating drugs, it's just a nonsense argument to me. There's no such thing as a victimless crime argument in this scenario. Even when it comes to the person who's using it's just a nonsense argument. Like, people using drugs affects those around them, so it's not necessarily a victimless crime, but it's not necessarily harming those people around them unless there are obvious, substance use disorder effects. And so I think we need to get away from this thinking that there's bad guys and there's victims from those bad guys. No, that's not how this works. The drugs come from nature. Whether or not we have to extract them out of a plant or not, isn't relevant, but the drugs are there. You can just go into the forest and find them. I don't understand why we have to have why we're Jelly Roll is making the point to begin with that drug addicts are humans. They're your friends and families. They're good people. Just because they have a substance use disorder doesn't make them less of good people. Yet he is kind of doing that thing with drug dealers. Like, are all of the alcohol companies terrible people for the 488 deaths that they might be responsible for? I understand it's a little different because part of the problem is bad people mix fentanyl in with all the drugs, right? That's a bad thing to do. But just being a drug dealer and supplying a drug that you know is the drug, that's not really a bad thing in my brain, because we have alcohol dealers, we have nicotine dealers, we have caffeine dealers, right? Those are all three legal drugs in this country, but we don't think of them as bad people. So I don't understand why we always have to do this moralizing of good and bad and victims and criminals and all this stuff. Hopefully I made my point there.
I'm here to tell y'all that fentanyl is going to make the Sackler family look like saints. And I want to let y'all sit with that for a second. It is time for us to be proactive and not reactive. We were reactive with crack. We were reactive with opioids. And y'all are taking the first step at somebody in Senate finally being proactive. I truly believe in my heart that this bill will stop the supply and can help stop the supply of fentanyl. But in part of being proactive, gentlemen and women and ladies, I have to be frank and tell y'all that if we don't talk to the other side of Capitol Hill and stop the demand, we are going to spin our tires in the mud. Y'all are taking the first step, but I encourage you to take it outside of this room, and you take it to your colleagues and your constituents, and you give them the most that you can. I know I've got a few seconds here, and Senator Brown said I may or may not go over.
Yeah, so we'll just pause there because his speech is pretty much over. And so basically what he's getting at is he wants us to stop the supply of fentanyl. So let's kind of like look at this bill, the Fend Off Fentanyl Act bill. Basically, the United States is facing the worst drug crisis in history. What they want to do, declare that the international trafficking of fentanyl is a national emergency, require that the president sanction transnational criminal organizations. I mean, I hate to tell you guys, but this just seems like more drug law enforcement, and drug law enforcement hasn't worked since we started the Controlled Substance Act in 1967 or whenever it was enacted. So more drug law enforcement isn't going to help. More prosecution of people that you think are criminals who happen to be drug dealers, not going to help, okay? We need to legalize drugs in this country. We need to get rid of the Controlled Substance Act. It's nonsense. Do you know what schedule fentanyl is? Do you know what drug schedule fentanyl is? Let's look it up together. I can't remember. I should know this off the top of my head, but I don't remember, so now we're going to do it together. Fentanyl schedule. My friends, look at me. Look. One of the most powerful drugs known to man. Schedule 2. Let me make it bigger for you. Schedule 2. Can I zoom into this? Oh, let's see. Look. Schedule 2, one of the most powerful drugs known to man. Our drug system scheduling doesn't make any sense. It's got to go. We got to scrap it. Fentanyl is useful in a medical setting, okay? We know that many drugs are useful in a medical setting. The dose creates the toxicity or causes the toxicity, right? That's the first law of toxicology. If you go take a toxicology class in high school or college, I don't know that any high school has a toxicology class. I don't think mine did, but maybe you're smarty pants, and so you get to go to the high school. It's the toxicology class, but the first thing you learn in toxicology class is the dose makes the poison. So, in this case, fentanyl is a completely safe drug in a hospital setting when a doctor is applying a controlled amount that they absolutely know how much they're giving you, because it's a Schedule 2 drug. aggravates me if you guys can't tell. The drug laws in this country are absolute nonsense. The drug enforcement in this country is absolute nonsense. The DEA is absolute nonsense. Anything a law enforcement officer tells you about drugs is 95% nonsense. Okay? I just don't even know what to do about this anymore, you guys. We have to somehow legalize the drugs. We cannot have capitalism of drugs. That's not what I'm advocating for. Let me be very clear. I'm not advocating for, this brand of fentanyl and this brand of heroin and this. No. That's bullshit. That's not what I'm not advocating for the capitalism of drugs. But the idea that we need to be harder on fentanyl dealers is nonsense. It hasn't worked for heroin. It hasn't worked for cocaine. It hasn't worked for marijuana. Legalize all the drugs and we will save lives, because then people can go buy a drug that they know what they're taking. If they buy XYZ drug, they take XYZ drug, they know it's that, they take the amount that they know that is safe to take, they're good to go. It happens all the time when people get a doctor's prescription. This idea that other illegal drugs are so much more dangerous is nonsense. The only reason that they're more dangerous is because they're illegal. They have other shit in them like fentanyl. A Schedule 2 drug. Then let's briefly try to touch on the Sackler family. I was trying to make this video shorter, but I'm getting frustrated up in here. I love Jelly Roll, but man, I would like to talk to this man a little bit more about what's going on. Let's talk about the Sackler family. For some reason in this country, we have started this narrative that the Sackler family created opioids, and then we never knew how bad opioids were until the Sackler family, and then the Sackler family distributed opioids to everyone in the country, and everyone became an opioid addict. And oh my God, it's the Sackler family's fault, and we didn't even know that opioids were that bad. I have bad news for you. We have known that opioids create a problem for hundreds of years. Okay? Look into the war between Britain and China. Basically, what ended up happening is China outlawed opium because in China there was a bunch of opium dens where the Chinese people would go sit in these opium dens and no work would get done in China because there's so many people had an opiate addiction that they would just hang out in these opium dens, and it was like a serious problem in their country. They made it illegal and shut the opium dens down. Now you might think, oh, this is great argument for law enforcement of opium. No, that's not what I'm saying. It just, at the time, this opium was an import to China, if I remember correctly. So by making it illegal, it was a little bit easier to keep out of the country at the time, when we didn't have international trade. Anyway, Britain started importing opium into China illegally again and reset up the opium dens to make the Chinese military forces weak because, Chinese military forces in general are more likely to use opioids. Why? Because they've experienced trauma and pain, and so they want to help medicate that pain with a painkiller, and opioids work on emotional pain just like they work on physical pain. So yeah, this whole notion that the Sackler family was like the first to make opioids and oh my God, that's why they're so addicting, it's kind of a nonsense story to me. We've known that opioids are dangerous and addictive for hundreds of years, so that's a moot point to me. Anyway, I'm going to end the video here. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please comment down below some more musicians that you would like me to react to where they discuss their drug use, whether it be firsthand or secondhand from friends and family that they have experienced. I seriously appreciate you watching, tuning into the channel, dropping out with me. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the like. You know what I'm saying? Come chill for the live streams. We'll talk about drugs, all this good stuff. I appreciate all of you beautiful people. I'm going to get out of here. Peace out, y'all.